Hi everyone, welcome to the Movieception Show. My name is Fariba, and today let's talk about Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, which is the latest Marvel film that came out this past weekend. Now, of course, I know I mentioned that I was going to post my movie review either the Friday or Saturday, but I just need to take a bit more time to really gather my thoughts because it is part of a much wider universe. And now that I really thought about it, let's just say this is going to be quite a long one, so definitely buckle up. But yeah, Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania is the film that kickstarts Phase 5 of the multiverse saga. And now this is a film that we all know is really just gearing up to kind of giving us as this much more menacing version of Kang the Conqueror, much different from the version that we saw from Loki, who is actually just as who he remains. And as you all know, or at least what he had described, the reason why he existed, or he who remains had existed, was to be the person who oversees everything, trying to make sure that there is some sort of control between the Kang variants, that there isn't, one Kang who's about to destroy the multiverse, the Nexus branches, or the fact that, we have timeline. Like, the last thing we need is more incursions happening, right? Which we also learned in Doctor Strange and Multiverse of Madness. And the last thing that they needed is for the timeline to really go out of order, become unbalanced to a point where things are really going to get pretty dangerous in the long run, right? So, in terms of the space-time continuum, right? So yeah, Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, we see that Ant-Man and his team do get stuck in the quantum realm, and as they start to realize what is going on within the realm, right, we also get to see Kang the Conqueror and what is going on around them. So how does this film do in terms of really just meeting its expectations? So for one thing I will say is that Jonathan Majors is probably the standout of this film. He is so incredible as playing this wholly different version of Kang the Conqueror, one who is far more menacing, far more threatening, someone who you can sense is giving out these dangerous signals. And you have to really give credit to Majors for really just doing such a phenomenal job at that. Because, I mean, when you compare this version to He Who Remains, who's also played by Majors as well, you can see just how different they are, but also how they have some similarities, and yet giving us the idea of how their identities can be quite different in terms of their personalities. And it just works out so well. And I think that, at least for one of the good things out of this film, is that with Majors being Kang the Conqueror, and the fact that he is supposed to be the next big bad, the one who is going to be the main villain of the multiverse saga, in a way that is supposed to be a Thanos level threat, all I can say is that Jonathan Majors as Kang the Conqueror is just great. I think that's the one thing I'm very, very happy about. I'm a bit more relieved knowing that we at least have a villain like Kang being played by a very, very talented actor like Majors. If you haven't seen Lovecraft Country, I would really, really recommend watching that because he's also great in that series. I think that was basically his breakthrough role. But yeah, no, honestly, Majors is great as Kang the Conqueror. He's literally the standout performance from that film. I think there is one other actor who really does stand out from this film, which I'll get into, but Majors is the highlight of this film. There's no denying that he is amazing. He really does show just how much Kang the Conqueror is threatening, menacing, scary. And I think that's one of the things I'm so grateful to see, that this casting was just spot on. And I can't wait to see more coming out of this character. Hopefully we'll see a bit more of the character really being fleshed out. But yeah, love Jonathan Majors as Kang. He's one of the greatest things about this film, especially for a film where, like, given that the multiverse saga, or not just multiverse saga, but the Marvel Cinematic Universe does have a villain problem. And typically speaking, when we look at the things like the villain problem, we don't typically have villains who are fleshed out, have much of a screen time, because that's usually the biggest problem that we see with Marvel movies, is that the villain's just there. He doesn't really stand out. He or she doesn't really stand out, or they don't really have much of a screen time to really kind of put much of an impact. And in this case, we do see Kang the Conqueror, who is, by the time he gets to, like, he starts appearing from the 30th to 45th minute, he starts to have a bit more of a presence in this film, and we start to see again more and more like, okay, this is Kang the Conqueror. He is a villain. We get that. He's someone that, Ant-Man team needs to really face up against, and that's one of the things that I at least will compliment about this film, because given the fact that we do have a lot of Marvel, villain problems, this is one of the cases where it is a much better type, especially because, again, in inception of characters like Wenwu, Thanos, Loki, Killmonger, we don't typically see characters who are that fleshed out or really even get that much screen time. So I think that's one thing that I can compliment about with Kong the Conqueror, and I'll talk more about that in a second. But love Jonathan Majors as Kong. He's amazing, and I just can't wait to see more out of him. And hopefully we'll see more of Kong being as menacing and threatening as we get more and more into Phase 5, as well as Phase 6, and getting to the end of Multiverse Saga. Now, another thing that I will compliment about this film is that the minor characters that are actually pretty interesting. For instance, Veb, he is like this really pink glob looking thing that, you know, from the first look, like he does seem a bit, you know, weird, scary in a sense. Like we don't know what this guy could be. But the moment that you start to get more and more into who he is, you start to feel how charming this character is. And if you don't know, this character is actually played by the same actor who played Kurtz in the first two films. Of course, in this film, he's not playing Kurtz, he's playing Veb, or voicing Veb. And as much as I would have loved to see Kurtz, Veb was a pretty great character. I think that this is one of the characters a lot of people are talking about because he, when it comes to the comedic timing with this character, it's pretty spot on. He, at least like, there's that one thing about the whole thing. I think that had a lot of people cracking up. I was cracking up, which is very rare because I don't really laugh in a lot of Marvel movies, especially when they try to put in some funny gags, which I don't think always lands. But in this case, Veb was really the type of character who was just there, even though for the comic relief, it was worth it because it does bring back some of the elements about the Ant-Man standalone series that was missing from this film. And yeah, I mean, yeah, this is an Ant-Man series that we all know has a bit more of that humorous, charming type, that humorous, charming ambience. And yet, this is the third film, the trilogy, that kind of deviates away from that tone. And yet, we still do have those funny aspects, a lot of that being because of Veb. And I also won't take away the fact that we've had some really interesting minor characters like Zulu or Jeptora. They were also very interesting characters to really like see, even though they're just there for a few moments. But it does at least give us an idea of who these characters are, what is happening in the quantum realm, who are these civilians, what these civilians are dealing with, which at least gives us an idea of, okay, well, now we understand how dangerous Kong the Conqueror is and why that this is going to be a big issue for the Ant-Man team. So I think that at least sets up a lot of the lore, the world building. I think that this is a big part this film does a really good job of setting up the world building of the quantum realm, something that we hadn't seen before. Because all we thought of the quantum realm was just kind of this, you know, the subatomic sort of level of the quantum realm that we hadn't seen before. It doesn't seem like there's really any life form of some sort unless you're anybody like the Ant-Man team who has somehow survived. And yet now we're seeing this film where apparently there is a whole colony of people who do sort of live in a more subatomic level, which is really weird, but also it at least allows us to get into the world building of things. And of course, a lot of that wouldn't have worked had it not been for the visual effects, the fact that, you know, they built this world. I think that, like, the visual effects in this film is pretty great. Just to see some of the beauty of the quantum realm that I never thought was going to be pretty beautiful to see, and yet it does work out here. And I know that's kind of goes into a lot of discussion about the VFX team, the whole controversy that happened last year, the fact that there was the poor conditions a lot of the VFX team had to deal with under Marvel Studios. I'm not going to go too deep into that, but having seen this film and comparing to other films where there has been some really big issues with in terms of the visual effects that I've been spotting here and there, of course, I feel like this film really does a pretty good job of making sure and maintaining the CGI, the visual effects, the practical effects of all things, as well as making sure the quantum realm looks pretty nice, and it does a great job at doing that. So that's really sort of my positive in terms of this film, right? I mean, another thing I will also mention is that Michelle Pfeiffer is great in this film as well, which I'm about to talk in a second. But yeah, let's just go into some of the problems I have, which I feel like there's a lot more problems with this film than really just the good stuff out of it. Yeah, this is a film that, you know, given that it's supposed to be such a high stakes film, I just didn't get that. I felt like it was a pretty bland way of really setting up what's going on with the quantum realm, what it means with the multiverse saga. And not just that, but really just setting up Kong the Conqueror as a whole and his overall arching bigger picture of really impacting the multiverse saga. And this is a film that's supposed to be the turning point of that. I think that's what is really, really upsetting about a film like Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, is that this is a film that's supposed to really be the turning point of all things that's happening in the multiverse saga. It's supposed to allow us this idea of, okay, who are we facing? What is going on? What does this mean for the multiverse? What does this mean for, time and space continuum? And this one really just doesn't really get into that, or at least it doesn't really establish the dangers that we're going to be facing as we get more and more into the multiverse saga, especially now that we have now started phase 5. So yeah, and I think one of the things that I will say is that, considering that this is a movie about Ant-Man and the Wasp, I just felt like this film really just didn't do justice for them. I mean, for one thing with Ant-Man, I think Paul Rudd is great as Ant-Man. It's really great to see him in playing these major roles, and I loved him in the first 2 films. I won't say the Ant-Man films are like my favorite, but I think that they are very funny. They're a lot of fun. A lot of that's because of Paul Rudd's energy and charm that he puts into the character like Scott Lang, and I feel like that really at least gives us this enjoyment factor in watching these Ant-Man films. But in this case, I feel like in this film, he doesn't really have much to do. Like, he is a lead character in a way, but also it's like, he doesn't really have much of a big presence as I would have wanted it to be, or at least this film should have marketed or had marketed. And I don't know, every time I see Ant-Man, I just feel like, okay, well, there isn't really anything special about him going on in this film. And not just with Ant-Man, but the bigger problem I also have with this film is Wasp. So remember, the title of this film is called Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. Yet for this film, I saw Ant-Man, I saw Kang a lot, I saw Janet a lot, but what happened to Hope? Hope was barely in this film. She was just kind of a sideline character who didn't really have much to do but to be the person who was saving Scott's butt every single time. And that only happens like 2-3 times throughout this film. But aside from that, she doesn't really have much to do, which is the most upsetting thing, because the whole title of this film is called Ant-Man and the Wasp, and yet Wasp barely really had anything to do in this film. And I think that was the most underwhelming thing to see out of it, just because if you are marketing this film as Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, you would have expected to see at least a lot of Wasps. Although I will say this though, if they are going to be addressing this film as Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, I think the Wasp part, I can see how this could be referring more to Michelle Pfeiffer's character, Janet. And this is where I'm going to say the second character who I really, really thought was fleshed out very well was Janet, I believe Janet Van Dyne. Holy cow, like Michelle Pfeiffer really also, I think aside from Jonathan Majors, the second actor who really, really does have a big presence in this film is Michelle Pfeiffer, who plays Janet Van Dyne, which makes a lot of sense because if there's one character who really understands the quantum realm, it's Janet. She's been there for so many decades. She knows what's going on. She understands the environment. She knows the creatures that live there. Of course, we're going to see a bit more of this screen time with her because she understands how dangerous this realm is. And honestly, Michelle Pfeiffer does a great job of playing Janet. Again, maybe if that's probably what the Wasp is referring to, I guess that makes a lot more sense. Although I think a lot of us at this point are considering the Wasp to be referring to Hope Van Dyne. But that being the case, I do at least enjoy the fact that Janet did get a bit more of a presence in this film, a lot more of the significance, because honestly, we haven't really gotten to see who Janet is because she has been missing the first 2 films. And this is a film that really does allow her to at least be a bit more fleshed out as a character and also understanding sort of this mentality that she's dealing with, sort of her own PTSD that she's dealing with now that she is back in the quantum realm. So I will say for one thing again that aside from Kang being the standout character, the second standout character was of course Janet Van Dyne, which is really surprising because for a film that is about Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, a film that did start off with Ant-Man, Scott Lang, with Paul Rudd, he wasn't even in the top 2 characters that I thought was, the most important, the most fleshed out. It was Kang the Conqueror and Janet. And so that kind of goes into some of the big problems I have with this film. Again, the main characters that we have, whether it be Casey, Scott, Hank, not Janet, but Hope, they don't really have the best writing in this film. I think they're all so underdeveloped. Hank doesn't really have much to do in this film other than just to talk to ants. And then Hope just there, as I mentioned before, she doesn't really do much in this film. And then of course, when we talk about Casey and Scott, that is one of the more important subplots of this film, because there is that father-daughter relationship that they have to deal with. Because again, when we are looking at the wider universe, we do know that Scott has been missing for 5 years. He wasn't in part of his daughter's life for 5 years of her life. He was missing for those 5 years, and now we're kind of seeing this effect of what happened as a result of Endgame, and which is that, well, there's a bit of this tension between Scott and Cassie, because, well, there a lot of things change. Scott became a celebrity, and Casey's just trying to do something where she can change the world, right? And as much as the fact that that is a really great way to set up some things in this film, overall, I just felt like they really underwhelmed the whole dynamic between Scott and Casey. As much as the fact that I really want to see a lot more going on for it, just this growth, just to see this nuance of how they're developing their relationship, how they're trying to fix some parts of it, or at least trying to repair part of the relationship that they've been trying to settle for a long time. A lot of that doesn't really happen, or at least it just becomes way too simple in a way that it doesn't become far more meaningful. And the more I watch this film, the more just kind of like, okay, well, Scott's just there to take care of his daughter, trying to make sure that she does get back to the real world, or at least the larger earth that they live in, and making sure that she does get back there. But with everything that's going on, because the writing's so jumbled, that when you do have things like Jenna trying to give us an idea of the quantum realm, or the fact that we have Kang, who is this, fascist in the, quantum realm, or the fact that we have Scott and Cassie trying to deal with Cassie trying to deal with their relationship, it doesn't become as fully fleshed as it would have wanted to be, and it just feels a bit underwhelming. That's all I can say, is that's really underwhelming and very bland. There's just nothing that really gets you hooked into the actual storylines that are happening in this film. As much as the fact that I think that the father-daughter storyline is a pretty interesting concept, it just falls bland. There isn't really anything special about it. And the more and more they really dive into this, the more and more I'm just kind of like, okay, well, this should be a far higher stakes. It should be far more powerful in a way that's trying to set up its message, especially when we have someone like Kang the Conqueror that they're trying to set up. Okay, well, this should be integrated and somehow interwoven in a way that allows the story to be fleshed out well, in a more cohesive, but also in a more consistent way possible. And it just doesn't really work out in this film, where everything just felt everything felt safe, but it also felt really, really bland. Like, there wasn't really anything in the atmosphere where I felt like I was feeling chilled. I was just kind of sitting there watching this film, seeing how things are playing out, only to see that there wasn't really anything that caught my attention to the point where it's like, okay, I get the sense of, well, this is who we're dealing with. This is what we have to be concerned about. We still have far more movies to deal with before we get to Kang Dynasty. Yet I just didn't get that out of this film. Like, this film really just disappointed in a way of what it should have been, fleshing out who Kang the Conqueror is, the stakes of it all, the tension of it all. It just doesn't get there, and that's a big problem. And I will even say this, that referring back to Scott and Cassie's relationship, the dynamic between Paul Rudd and Catherine Newton, who plays the more recent version of Cassie, because there was the one who played in Endgame, which was played by Emma Ferran, who did not return to play Cassie because they recasted her with Catherine Newton. So that's just a little bit of a background there. But in terms of this, right, as I'm watching this chemistry between Paul Rudd and Catherine Newton, I just didn't really get it. It was just a bit, I feel like a lot of it felt forced in a way, instead of feeling really natural. Like, for me, what I saw in Endgame was a far more fitting dynamic that we were getting. I felt all that emotional depth between Scott and Cassie, because the relationship I saw just from that quick bit between Paul Rudd and Emma Furman was there. Like, I can feel it. Like, I felt the tension. I can feel the emotionality. I can feel how saddening it is, but also just this relief that was going on. Wow, like, my father is back. Wow, my daughter didn't perish in the in the snap. Like, I felt it, and that was just there for like a minute or so of the screen time we saw with Scott and Cassie, and a lot of that goes down to the writing right there. But here it's like, when you see Cassie and when you see Scott the relationship doesn't feel as organic as it should be. Again, I felt so unnatural. It didn't really feel as if there was much going on in terms of the relationship other than just, Scott trying to help his daughter out. But even then, like, I felt like Cassie was such an underwritten character. Like, there was really no development with the Cassie character aside from just her, just being there, trying to be the righteous voice in a way of, well, we need to help these people. But again, there wasn't really this growth, this organic growth of who Cassie is, and then trying to build that onto the relationship with Scott. There was just, again, a lot of things that just didn't really work out, and a lot of that is because of chemistry. But when we do look into the issues of the chemistry just falling flat, or the fact that the characters are so underdeveloped, the bigger arching issue of why all of this fumbled is not because of the actors, of course. I think that even with the recasting with Catherine Newton, I don't think that's a big issue for it. I think Catherine Newton is a pretty great actress. I've seen her in a lot of her work, whether it be Supernatural, Freaky Friday, or not Freaky Friday, but Freaky. She's a really good actress. I don't think the issue is coming down to her acting. I don't even think the issue comes down to any of the actors acting, whether they're playing Scott, Hank, Hope. The big issue of this film is the writing. The writing is just flat. The writing is just not there. Things are just not as organized as it should be. And not just that, but a lot of the subplots that were supposed to build upon just didn't really work out. They were just all over the place. And not just that, but because it felt so safe, it just became so bland. It just didn't have that excitement that this movie was supposed to have. And because of that, the writing faltered. And I think that's one of the reasons why this film doesn't really perform the way that I would have wanted to be. And yet also feeling so disappointed because this film doesn't really get to the hype of what this universe is supposed to be creating, what this next saga is supposed to be setting up. And that's what's really so disappointing, because the writing, like, this film could have done so much. Yes, it is deviating away from the Ant-Man saga or the Ant-Man series. It doesn't go into the more humorous aspect that this series is typically known for. But the dramatic stuff is totally fine. That is, if as long as the writing works with it, it should have worked. And it just doesn't. Like, even when there are some comedic aspects to it, things do get a bit jumbled up there. Like, I will say for MODOK, I mean, he was really ridiculous, without a doubt. I mean, I feel like that was, like, the funniest, the most ridiculous, but the most cringiest thing ever. I think, which is really weird, because I thought in the trailers he didn't look that bad, but when you actually see him in the film, that is just ridiculous. I honestly thought he looked so much more ridiculous in this film than he looked in the trailer, but which I guess is supposed to be the point, because that's supposed to bring a bit more of that humorous aspect into the Ant-Man series, and I believe that's what the character is supposed to be, a bit more humorous as well, which, again, like, it didn't really work necessarily as I would have hoped as well. Like, again, another character who is coming back from the Ant-Man series, and I mean, I think Corey still does much as he can to really just bring back Daryl or MODOK in this character, and it is very ridiculous. There is that one part by the end of the film where I just felt like the comedic timing just did not fit with what was going on at the end. Again, there is always that imbalance of things of what's going on with the atmosphere of some things, and that was another big issue I did sense out of this film. Like, there's even the actual final act felt so underwhelming, where yes, there's supposed to kind of be this uprising where a lot of group of people are supposed to be, joining together to fight off against Kang, and kind of, in a sense, it's supposed to be that so-called Avengers level sort of fight. And it just felt so underwhelming. For one thing, it went by so quickly. Kang was kind of kicked around pretty easily, defeated pretty easily, which I that also made it far more harder to really understand or get the sense that he is a very dangerous villain when he was defeated that easily by the final act. So that was another big issue that I did feel out of this film. And yeah, even though I mentioned before that Majors was a great actor, he really fleshed out Kang, the actual overall bigger picture of Kang was kind of faltering as over there as well. Like, he wasn't as menacing as I wanted him to be, which again kind of makes me a bit more worried about how they're going to set up some things with Kang than rather just the things like the casting or the backstory and all that sort of thing, right? And now, one of the things I would also say is that even though the final act was very underwhelming and just felt so quick, and doesn't really kind of get into the resolution of things or really set up the bigger picture of what's going to happen in Multiverse Saga. The one thing that I really think that this movie does such a great job at is the post-credit scenes. The post-credit scenes, I never would have imagined both of them were going to be super exciting. And that comes with the fact with some of the last few films that we've had in the Multiverse Saga so far, like Thor Love and Thunder and Doctor Strange and Multiverse of Madness, the actual post-credit scenes haven't been as hyped as I would have wanted them to be. But this is a film that really, really gets you excited about the future of the MCU. Especially the second one, the one that comes, the post-credit scene. Which is insane because that was actually the most exciting thing about this film was the post-credit scene. And the fact is that that for me, the most exciting part of this film, the most memorable part of this film was the post-credit scene is also what makes me so concerned because if the rest of this film is bland, but the one thing that I was excited about was the post-credit scene, yeah, there's a big problem right there. And that's where I knew right away that, okay, this film was not as good as I would have hoped it to be. It was not as exciting, which is very problematic, which makes me a bit worried about the quality of films that we're going to get moving forward. Because, I mean, there has been a talk of, okay, have we been getting too much of Marvel content recently? Last year, I believe we had about 3 TV shows, 3 movies, 2 specials, and they all came just about not too far along each other in a monthly basis. I believe even Moon Knight, I think, kickstarted off in March. Then we had Doctor Strange in May. Then we had Miss Marvel in June. Then we had Thor Love and Thunder in July. She-Hulk in August. October was Werewolf by Night. November was Black Panther Wakanda Forever. And in December was the holiday special. We had so much content last year, which I believe may have made the quality of things kind of dimmed down a bit. Like it waned. And we can see that becoming a problem. Whereas that even though there's such a high quantity of things, the quality has been declining a little bit. And we do sense that here with Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, where this is a film that comes about 2 months after the holiday special. And it's supposed to kick off Phase 5. We still have a lot more to go through in terms of Phase 5. And yet, this is the first film where it just doesn't really hit the spot. It just underwhelms and sort of really setting the stage for everything that's supposed to set up in the Multiverse Saga. And that's just really disappointing. And hopefully now that we have, seeing what's been going on, we've been hearing about the fact that the Marvel movies are going to be far more spaced out moving forward. Maybe they'll give them a lot more time to really focus on the writing, because the writing in Quantumania was just all fumbled. It just didn't work out. It was just not as risky or not as high intensity as it's supposed to be. It just didn't have the high octane or the high caliber it was supposed to demonstrate in this film. And I think that that's really what makes it so disappointing as like a Phase 5 film, is that it's supposed to be the launch of Phase 5 and it doesn't do that at all. And I think that's where it's so disappointing, just reflecting upon Quantumania, because I really wanted this film to succeed. I really wanted this film to work. Even with the whole change in tone, I prefer dramatic type than really comedic type. So the fact that it did take a bit more of a dramatic turn, I feel like, okay, well, I'm going to give this a chance. But even with the changes like the tone being changed, or the fact that, this is a film that really is giving us a second sort of image of who Kang is, the issue is that if you don't have the writing intact, if you don't have that set in stone, then everything else is going to become a mess. And we do see that here in this film, where everything just felt so bland. Nothing really kind of fit in between. The characters' chemistry was kind of off. Even with the villain, like, even when we have the best performances in the film, that doesn't mean that the actual villain itself is fully fleshed. Like, I mean, at least in this case, we do see a lot more of Kang, which is far more than we've seen with any Marvel movie a Marvel villain that we've, come across. I would not say that the Kang villain that we saw in this film would be in the same level as like Killmonger, Vulture, even Loki, even Thanos in this case, right? But hopefully now that we have seen this different version, maybe we'll start to see a bit more of the dangerous versions of Kang, because there is far more apparently that we're going to be dealing with based upon that post-credit scene. But yeah, overall, when I do look into Quantumania, is it the worst or second to worst Marvel movie I've seen so far? I would say no. I would just say that it is the most disappointing film because of just the high intensity that that it had demonstrated, that it had marketed itself to be, and it just didn't reach that level. I don't think it's a bad movie. I think that it does what it can and it tries to do. There isn't really too many technical issues I can really discuss about, aside from a lot of the writing problems that really affect the story and the cohesiveness of it all, and just like the excitement of it. But I will say that, considering that this is a multiverse saga, it is really disappointing. It just doesn't really reach the level of anticipation that I wanted it to be. It just felt too safe. Like, this is a film that does feel too safe when it's supposed to be risky in what it's trying to do. And yeah, Quantumania, I mean, I don't know if I'm gonna be watching this film again. Like, I mean, who knows? Maybe this is gonna be like Age of Ultron, where eventually we're gonna have to look back to this film, where, because it does set up a lot of things, maybe this is a film that will be far more significant and at least set up the world building of things. But we'll just have to see about that. But overall, I was just not impressed. I just came out of that theater just wanting more, and I was just really, really, really underwhelmed. So yeah, that's all I really have to say about Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. I know that's a lot that I discussed about with this film, because there's just so much to really discuss about, not just about the movie, but also the wider universe. And hopefully now that, they are changing how they're going to run things at Marvel Studios, instead of just pushing in a lot of content monthly, we're going to have a much more spaced out schedule. So maybe that's going to help out in maybe improving the quality moving forward. But that's something that we have to just keep an eye on for. But yeah, that's all I have to say about Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. What are your thoughts? Have you seen the movie? If you have, what are your thoughts overall? What do you think about Kang the Conqueror in general? What do you think about the performances in this film? What do you think about just kind of how it executed its story? Are you convinced that Kang the Conqueror is the next big bad? Are you scared about him? Or do you think that they still need a bit more time to really develop the character and they just haven't really reached that point yet? What do you think is going to happen next, now that the next movie we're going to have is Guardians Galaxy Volume 3? Do we think we're going to start seeing improvement in the quality of Marvel films moving forward, knowing that, we've been complaining about this for about 2 years now? And are you hopeful about the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Are you still going to watch it after, the disappointment that was Quantumania? Let me know in the comments down below, and make sure to like and subscribe.